going to introduce the pleasure of introducing Randy Riddle, who's Soil Survey Office Leader and Soil Scientist with the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. And NRCS, I just want to say, is doing fantastic stuff in the urban soil arena. And Randy's one of the leaders of that. And so we're just very happy that he was able to come today, but also he's your neighbor. So you should be very happy about that. So take it away.
All right, well, hello everyone. I am Randy Riddle. I'm the Soil Survey Office Leader for the Central Coast and Southern California areas. Cover an area from San Diego County all the way up to about Marin, north of the Bay Area. So quite a large territory. I also serve as the chair for the Urban Soils Focus Team with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. But today we're going to focus on our soil survey data in Los Angeles County. So a quick rundown. We're going to define the soil survey program, and then we'll take a closer look at what data is available in LA County, where you can access it, and then we'll look a little bit closer at some of the results of the recent survey that was published in the urban core, what we call the southeastern part soil survey. We're also we'll wrap up with a couple soil profile pictures, and we'll talk about some of the properties, and I'll give you some links and some references to some of our resource materials on the website. So what is the National Cooperative Soil Survey? I'll go ahead and read the definition. It's a nationwide partnership of federal, regional, state, and local agencies and private entities and institutions. The partnership works to cooperatively investigate, inventory, document, classify, interpret, disseminate, and publish information about soils. So the NRCS, which is the Natural Resources Conservation Service, is my agency that I work for, and we're the lead agency for this effort. So here we're looking at a map of Los Angeles County, and as you can see, the red lines carve up the county into these 8 subsets. So each of these subsets are the individual soil surveys that we have published throughout the county. On the left here, I have a list of the names and the acres. In parentheses are the publication dates. So you can see it's been about a 48-year period that we've been publishing data in LA. And the most recent is the urban core in the southeastern part, which is downtown Los Angeles and the LA basin. Generally, when we're talking about urban soils with the LA County data, we're talking about that southeastern part survey and the western San Fernando Valley area. So where can we find it? I recommend starting from the Soil and Plant Science Division homepage. Here there's all the links that you can need to access all of our data sets, and there's a variety of different tools and extensions and data sets that you can use or download. I have 2 highlighted here from the list. The Web Soil Survey has an integrated GIS platform where you can zoom in on your work area or define your area of interest, and you can recall the soil survey map and any of the associated reports. You can create custom maps right using the extension and actually develop a custom PDF report that you can print off or save to your computer. Also, the Soil Web is newer. That's useful for browsing. It has a more limited data set associated with it, but it's handy for just a quick look at the data. It's on a Google Maps platform, and you can scroll over to your area and you can actually click on the map and then look at a graphical depiction of the dominant soil components in that map unit, and then also recall some data. So also want to point out on here, on the right side, there is a link to the focus teams. So I'm the chair for the Urban Soils Focus Team. If you click on that, there's going to be a link. Well, there's actually going to be 13 focus teams listed, and you can click on the Urban Team website there, and there's a variety of resource materials there, including my contact information. So there's been this progression of approaches to mapping in urban areas throughout the soil survey's history. Early on, there wasn't much focus on the urban areas. They were largely avoided. In a lot of cases, a circle was drawn around the developed areas, including the cities, and there would have been no data associated with them. This is because there was a much higher priority and a focus on mapping the major agricultural lands at the time. So there's also a high cost per acre. This is followed by a period that I'm going to say had some progress, where we're identifying urban land, which represents the buildings and pavement, or the impervious areas. And they were mapped in combination or complex with adjacent natural soils that were known in the area or observed. In some cases, some surveys mapped right through an urban area without even recognizing any sort of modification to the soils or any development at all. It'll resemble a natural area. In the areas that did identify some transported type materials, which are the altered materials, they were generally very generalized, kind of vague soil components. And we use what we call a higher category classification. Typically, you would see eudorthents, xerorthents, and austorthent type components, depending on your region. So this brings us to our more modern techniques, where we're now identifying the human altered and human transported soil components down to our most detailed level of classification, the soil series level. And we're identifying these on anthropogenic landforms. And I'll talk about this a little more on the next slide. But by doing this, we're identifying the degree and extent of soil alteration at the soil survey scale. So in the future, where does that take us? We'd like to consider, we're going to consider looking at the soils under sealed surfaces. So that's under sidewalks, paved areas. How can we represent that data some way and provide some useful information? We've already worked on and have a proposal out to improve our current taxonomic criteria that we're using. So there's a soil order proposal. It's called ARTASOLs, and that's currently under review with the soil taxonomy committees. And so we're hoping there'll be a positive outcome with that and be available in a few years from now. We're also looking at expanding the use of proximal sensors while we're mapping. And lastly, there's some consideration and talk to start documenting and representing trace elements and contaminants in our data set, which is currently unrepresented. I'm not saying it's going to happen or when it's going to happen, but it's being considered. So when you think of a soil survey, typically the first thing you think of is the actual map itself. So here we're looking at the soil map of downtown Los Angeles. This is in the most recent Urban Core survey. It was published in 2016. And you can see the soil delineation lines here in blue. And the soil survey relies on identifying the soil landform or soil landscape relationships. We're going to identify the soil types based on their geomorphic position, so that way you can locate them in the field. So the soils we know occur as a continuum across the landscape. However, their properties are organized based on the factors influencing their development or their genesis. So if we can understand these processes and the surface alteration is part of that process, that's the anthropogenic processes, then we can start identifying and spatially locating these soils on the landscape. And then we can represent that at our mapping scale. So looking a little closer at the data from the southeastern part survey, we ended up with 158 soil landscape mapping units. Now the mapping units, if you're unfamiliar, are conceptually, these are uniform management areas. So these are going to have similar slope classes, they're going to have similar climate and soil properties. So you can predict the behavior of the soil for your management on site. So that's what the map units are. So within these 158 map units, we represented 185 soil components. Now, I wanted to point this out, that this survey is sort of unique compared to some of the older ones, because we have map unit specific data for nearly all of our soil components. So every description you find in the data set is located somewhere in that map unit. Some of the older surveys, the data was consolidated. You would have one representative head-on representing the entire survey. And in such a heterogeneous environment in Los Angeles, we thought it was important to provide map unit specific data. So I think that's one of the shining points for this survey. Within those soil components, there were 27 of the human altered and human transported soil types that meet the US taxonomy's criteria for HAHT or HAHT soils. 15 of those were named in the map unit names, what we call major components. We also established 20 unique soil series specific to the Los Angeles area, and 5 of those met the criteria for the human altered or human transported series criteria. For the most part, we're talking about human transported materials in this environment. And overall, we found soils that were natural, partially or completely altered, so all over the spectrum. Now we're going to look at a quick comparison of the soil survey in New York City compared to the data locally here in LA. As you can see in the table, New York City is much more sealed, sealing meaning impervious, around 62.7% in New York City. One caveat I'll add here, you'll look at 43% and be like, hey, that looks a little bit low, and it is. Reason being that our survey area was so large around the perimeter and interior, we had quite an extensive area of kind of open space on the open hillsides, especially along the foothills of the Angeles National Forest. So that number is a little lower than the actual developed part of the basin floor. So we also found around 11% of the soils met the taxonomic criteria for human transported materials, and 32% had a thin surface amendment to them, which means in US taxonomy, less than 50 centimeters of alteration at the surface. So, and we had found about 12% of what we're calling native soils, and these were isolated to the natural hillsides. So you can see some comparison between the New York City survey and Los Angeles. All right, so here we're looking at some soil profiles of profiles that were developed in human transported materials. And I just want to show you that there's a great diversity in this material. You know, here on the left, we have the LaGuardia series. We can see a high artifact content. And there's also, artifacts are generally construction debris. So we're talking bricks, concrete, asphalt, things of that nature. Moving over, the Lady Liberty series has a lot of coal slag and fly ash. You can see these bands between 20 and around 55 centimeters in that photo with a thin topsoil layer. It's actually overlying an intact subsoil. So moving over, we have the Dapple Gray series in Los Angeles. And this is actually an Echo Park just right by downtown. And you can see this very distinct coloration and abrupt color changes associated with a profile that's been pushed around and reworked and redeposited here using machinery. And you also want to point out here on this profile at the surface, there's visually striking and clear evidence of profile development. Here you can see how dark the surface is, and there's an A horizon reforming at the surface there. It's very easy to see. And lastly, on the right, we have a dark colored profile in the Hacienda Heights area on some of the terraced residential areas. So you can see there's a great diversity of properties even within the anthropogenic. I know I'm running a little long, so I'll try to go through this quick. Here are some other common soils that we find in LA. We have the Windfetch series on the light, closely resembles a natural profile. However, the upper 30 centimeters in this case is actually transported type materials. Same thing here, very different looking profile with very different properties out in the West Covina area, but generally we're looking at surface grading, level the land, bring back some topsoil to establish size. We'll jump over here to the right. The Centinela series, I just want to point this out. This is over in Hawthorne, and we have native material on the bottom here. It's very dark colored with high shrink swell properties. And in order to develop the sites, generally we've been finding that there's been a thin loamy cap trucked in and spread at the surface in order to establish grass, lawns, and things of that nature. So these are what some of the common soil types look in LA. I'm going to wrap up talking about some of our soil resources that we have available on the website. So again, I recommend starting from the soil survey homepage, the soils.usda.gov. And from there, you can access any of these materials. On the Focus Team website, we just published an an ArcGIS online story map. And I think you'll really enjoy that if you have a look at it. We also have a urban soils fact sheet, and there's links to the Soil Survey Manual, Chapter 11, which is the urban soil survey chapter. Also, if you scroll to the bottom of the map, there's an ArcGIS online integrated map embedded in the website, and you can look at the soil series extent explorer of all of the soil series that we have mapped, or that we know about, that have human altered or human transported materials in their concept. And you can just click on that and recall the data directly from the map. So take a look at that, it's pretty interesting. And lastly, there are 4 technical notes, and I recommend checking out Tech Note 4. This may interest a lot of people working with urban agriculture. That's a recent document. I think it was published within the last 2 or 3 years. You can Google these very easy, and I'm going to give you the links here on the next slide. And lastly, unique in California, we have 2 supplement manuscripts. And these are companion documents to the Web Soil Survey data, or our SURGO data sets. In the past, we had the hard booklets, and there was a manuscript written to provide soil profile descriptions and some of the methods and things like that. So we developed those in addition to our online platform, and those are available on the website. In particular, in Los Angeles, I'll point out, we had to use a fairly extensive phase name convention for naming some of the soil types with common taxonomic units due to the availability of our taxonomy at the time. So those phase names are defined in this document, and you won't find that anywhere else. So I highly recommend having a look at that. And here's a list of links. I'm going to flip back to this here in a second for you because I know I'm running late. And I just want to thank you all for your attention, and some beautiful sites throughout the Los Angeles area. And happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Randy.